Okay, this one is completely spontaneous. I may have literally just thought of it in the last minute. I tend to do that. I tend to talk about things quite randomly because I feel that if with a few exceptions, if I sit down and prepare a video like I was making a speech, it would take away a certain, not authenticity, but I think this way, I tend to be more comprehensive, actually, because I say what I want to say rather than sort of planning it out and thinking, oh, I'll edit this. Anyway, the issue here is social media and how much influence it has. And this is one of the defining issues of the 21st century. Social media has utterly changed the world, and people like Mark Zuckerberg and others have obviously, as the CEOs and founders of these websites, they are arguably some of the most influential people of the 21st century. I don't think there's any question about that. They've changed the world. We know that social media inspires revolutions, inspires people, movements, protests, counter protests. It's a very, very powerful tool. And you can have a whole study into the sociology of um, the social media effect or the Facebook effect. You know, how people perceive things based on what they've read online. But I do wonder what is the sort of extent or what's the barometer of seeing the extent to how influential it is. So, as an example, if you take a news item, and leave aside Facebook for a second, let's focus on YouTube, what I'm using right now. If you take any given news item, let's say, for example, a controversial issue or a taboo issue or a sensitive issue like Britain imposing sanctions on China as of yesterday. Now, in my line of thinking, anyone who believes in liberal democracy and human rights would welcome that. But I guarantee if I go to one of those videos, there'll be a lot of cynicism. So, is that cynicism representative of a majority opinion, or is it just that people who are interested in the issue, who look at those videos, have a certain trajectory of opinion? I've said before that certain networks seem to have an ability to control or coerce or influence their viewership in a way that other networks don't. I mean, you could get people looking at a BBC video and you're going to get quite split opinions. You're going to get rigorous debate. Say what you want about the BBC, but look at BBC comment sections and there is different views. There'll be people criticizing the BBC for one reason or another. There'll be people supporting the story. You do get a plurality of views. I'm not saying that the BBC always respects that, but I'm saying you do get that in the comment section. If you look at any BBC video on YouTube or BBC Story on Facebook, I contrast that with RT. If you look at an RT video on YouTube, it's pretty much universally a uniform opinion, which is very pro-Russia and anti-West. You might occasionally get dissenters like me who will come in and stir things up a bit, but you also get this with Chinese state media. In regard to these sanctions, also the Alaska summit between Antony Blinken and Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, or rather, I don't know if he's been replaced now actually because it wasn't him. It was another Politburo member. It didn't look like Wang Yi. I didn't follow it closely because it just um, anything to do with China can depress me, frankly. So I try to temper how much I look at it. But it is one of the defining issues of our age. But anyway, the Chinese videos on that summit was entirely, there was a uniform opinion against America and the West, and it was very cynical and very much about American hypocrisy and the absurdity of some of these comments failing to see that, people are defending the CCP. If they're not Chinese, then they are obviously CCP apologists. But as for the Chinese nationalists who defend it, you know, they have no right to be pointing fingers about hypocrisy because they use a blocked website. To use YouTube in China, you need a VPN. It's a blocked website in order to praise Chinese politicians and the CCP. It's just it's like a parody. It's utterly absurd, and they do not see their own hypocrisy. And quite honestly, it infuriates me, to put it bluntly. That's why I try not to look at those sort of videos, especially if they're Chinese state controlled, because it's just a chorus of kind of nationalist groupthink, and it's quite depressing. Um, so I don't know how reliable comment sections are as a sort of way of looking at a given story. I mean, we know that music videos, for example, of certain musicians, uh, their critics can go on a little campaign to thumb down the video. I know that was the case with Justin Bieber. But when it comes to issues outside of pop culture, like geopolitics, is it that the cynics are just more vocal and more active? Because I find that it's a very strange thing that people in totalitarian states go out of their way to praise the dictatorships. And yet, in democracies, there's very widespread cynicism. People love to bash politicians, they love to bash the government, the monarchy to a lesser extent, but there's a lot of cynicism. And I don't really accept it's because our leaders are weak or our leaders are not good enough. Obviously, there's the issue that in communist states or other totalitarian states, people can't criticize the government. But when they have the freedom to do so, that is when they are in open states, they still defend it. I think in the case of China, that's definitely a result of the nationalistic indoctrination, which is intense over there. I've seen it directly. Um, but I do sometimes worry about the sheer industrial scale distortion that is going on. And I really have a problem with people who enjoy freedoms of a democratic society and everything that comes with that. And they, in the case of the West or in the case of our society, they're so cynical and they love to mock the West and they mock our government and criticize it and try to run it down. And yet if they don't openly support the CCP or Putin, they will act as useful idiots and play the devil's advocate. It pisses me off, to be quite honest. Um, I don't understand it, and I have little patience with it. But is it a reliable indicator of what the public thinks? I mean, I don't know if you could take a particular news video and let's say 70% of the comments were cynical. Would that be a fair indication of the public thought process? I mean, how can you ever really know what a majority consensus is in a country of 68 million people? Obviously, there's elections and there's referendums, but outside of that, how can you really know? Um, it's not a simple thing. I mean, I'm trained to be a freelance journalist. I could do a vox pop on the street. I could ask people questions. So I could ask 100 women, would you call yourself a feminist? Let's say 70, 80 of them said yes. Would that be a fair way to look at wider society? Well, the understanding would be I would ask a range of different women. I'd ask young women, old women, middle-aged women, black, white, Asian, to get a kind of cross reference. So it's probably the most accurate way to look at that. Of course, this year we've got the census. I found it pretty straightforward. I didn't think it was particularly complicated. And it is mandatory. Whether that shows up anything really, to that would be very surprising or very groundbreaking. I don't know, but it's a curious thing what consensus opinion is, because what you find in totalitarian states is the ruling regime always kind of uses the people as an excuse. So if the CCP is insulted, they'll say you've hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. It's an extremely manipulative but quite effective tool. You'll never hear Boris Johnson saying, or Emmanuel Macron for that matter, saying that if their government is criticised, you've hurt the feelings of the British people or the French people. Okay, you might get that to some extent over Brexit, but not. I just think the dynamic's different. Um, so I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. To what extent is social media an accurate? I mean, I haven't even looked at the whole picture. I've just spoken about YouTube. You could take stories on Facebook. Obviously, different websites are going to have a different angle. Some are more to the left, some are more to the right. If you join a group that's very, long live the Queen and reclaim the British Empire, something like that, you're obviously going to get more conservative opinions. If you join a group that's, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, the real leader of Britain, I'm just throwing these out, these aren't actual groups, you would get the idea of it's a nice moon out there tonight. You would get the idea of the left wing bias. So I think it's genuinely hard to find a centrist ground platform. Very hard. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Even platforms that are broadly centrist will have a slight angle one way or the other. Times, for example, the Times newspaper, it's a lot more centrist than the Daily Telegraph. I would still say it has a moderate conservative swing. Um, that's just an example. But of course, the print press is now all going online as well gradually, so it just totally changes the dynamic. Let me know your thoughts.